Let's talk about Ohio State here. This mailbag question came in. YouTube comments, X formerly known as Twitter, or if you want priority access, go join the flock over at Subtext. That link in the description below wherever you listen to or watch this show. This question came in from Brandon. Oregon put up 505 yards on the Buckeyes in the shoe in 2021. 269 on the ground, 236 in the air. As much as Mario's offenses get criticized, do you think our offense puts up those kind of numbers on Ohio State this year at home? Well, one thing to remember about that particular game, number one, Ohio State, I don't think had hired Jim Knowles yet at defensive coordinator. I think that game was one of the reasons they actually fired the guy they had at defensive coordinator at the time, because Joe Moorhead was in his bag and he absolutely cooked him. Joe Moorhead is over at Akron, for those who are curious, and struggling as the head coach. I don't think it's a particularly easy job in the Mid-American Conference, and it hasn't gone well so far. They've been well under 500 in his 2 seasons. At Mississippi State, he wasn't great. Then he came to Oregon, and look, he might just be one of those guys that's a really good offensive coordinator. I thought he was good. I thought he was significantly better than Marcus Arroyo. He out-schemed whoever that Ohio State DC was in that game. That's why he went to 505 yards and 269 on the ground. He ran the same concept, which is just receiver crack back, run to the edge. He ran it in 3 different looks, and Ohio State couldn't make the adjustment. They did not adjust the entire game. Joel Klatt was ripping them for it. Even when they finally went zone for that play when that play call came along, Oregon still picked up a first down. So that game was one where they'd played Fresno State the week before, and it felt like Oregon was saving everything for Ohio State. And it worked. It worked. Oregon beat Fresno State, then they beat Ohio State the following week. That offense was the same offense that couldn't score on 1st and goal inside the 5 against Stanford. That was the same offense that beat a 1-5 Cal team 24-17 at home. That was the same offense that got blanked in the first half on the road against Utah. They had a great day. There is such a thing in the context of a season or a game or a player. You catch lightning in a bottle and the stars align for you. And it was a good matchup. I mean, who's beaten Ohio State 3 years in a row? Michigan. You know who has, you know, 2 guys that have the same philosophy about winning football games? Jim Harbaugh and Mario Cristobal. Line up, pound the rock, out physical you. That's how they want to win. And that style beat Ryan Day 4 consecutive years. 21 Oregon, 22, 23, or 4 consecutive times. Michigan 3 years in a row, and Oregon once. That's who's beaten Ohio State in the last 4 years. So they have completely revamped their identity. If you look at the way that they played last year in their road game, in a win against Notre Dame, that was some gutsy stuff. The 2021 Ohio State team loses that football game probably by a couple possessions. But a year ago, they didn't. And this Ohio State team has a lot of the key returners, just like Oregon. It's a big reason why they're the 2 favorites in the Big Ten and big favorites to make the playoff and contend for a national championship. They have a lot of the same players. They have added a bunch of new players like Caleb Downs to that defense to make it even better. And they can play a more physical brand of football. So I think Oregon's offense is going to be superb this year. I think the number of yards they put up falls on Dylan Gabriel. I think it falls on how successful he is able to be against that stout Ohio State defense, because I expect the offensive line to be able to hold up in pass protection as they have for the last 3 years. The last 2 with Dan Lanning as a coach, but they've just been outstanding. They've been absolutely phenomenal the last several seasons. You're not going to run for 269 yards on this team. You're just not. That game was like 14-10 or 16-14. Like it was a slugfest. I don't think Oregon Ohio State looks like that. I think there's a greater likelihood it looks like Oregon Washington, but not quite as high scoring. I don't think you have the same level of quarterback play. Michael Penix and Bo Nix, it is a step down to Dylan Gabriel and Will Howard. Collectively, Gabriel better than Howard, closer to Nix than Howard is to Penix by a landslide. Still, you don't have as high-level quarterbacks. You're going to have really, really good defenses. I don't think either team is going to push for 500 yards of offense. I think if one team does, they're winning the game by 10 or more points. Because I think both of these defenses are so good, are so talented, are so veteran laden, and have coordinators that have been there for the last several years. You've got Tosh Lupoy, Chris Hampton, and Dan Lanning back, top 3 defensive coaches. Jim Knowles, I'm pretty sure, is back as Ohio State's defensive coordinator. They have got staff continuity. They've got player continuity, and they already had high-end talent and produced at a high level. Ohio State last year was not a premier offense, but they were a darn good defense. They were a darn good defense, and that's why they won 11 football games. So I think that for Oregon to put up 500 yards, Gabriel would have to have the game of his life, because you're not going to have, I think CJ Verdell went for like 180 and 3 touchdowns in that game. That's not going to happen. This Ohio State defense is too talented. And I love Oregon's offense. You're just not going to do that here. So I don't think that is particularly, like, Gabriel would have to go for at least 330 yards to get 500 yards of offense, which is not inconceivable. I, again, just don't, with the way that game is going to be played, I don't expect it to be a shootout. I expect it to be lower scoring than Oregon-Washington games last year. I don't expect it to be as low scoring as Ohio State-Notre Dame. I think this is a game that is played in the mid to high 20s, whereas Washington games were mid to high 30s. I think this is a game that is played in the mid to high 20s, and it's a 28-24 or 27-24, 26-23, whatever. Like one of those sort of football games, because the caliber of defenses you have. And the offenses are incredibly capable. But what do we know about Chip Kelly? He likes to run the football. He likes to run the football. Sure, they'll throw it down the field. They'll take their shots. So will Oregon. But both head coaches, both philosophies are, I think striving to be pretty balanced, but want to have the run game be a primary element of what they do. So when you factor that in, I think it's hard to see the offense is taken off. I would be surprised if there's a combined 300-plus yards rushing in this game between the two teams, because of the way that the defensive fronts look. I mean, Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau for Ohio State, and guys like Jordan Birch and Jeff Bossa and Derek Harmon, Jamari Caldwell for Oregon, all the edge guys who are going to be true sophomores this year. There's just a bunch of talent over there. And when you have those sorts of defensive players, they just make it tough. So I don't think, like, you can say, well, Mario's offenses weren't as good. No, they absolutely were not. But that was their best game. That was their absolute positive best game that season. They peaked. They peaked in that game right there. And, they went on to have a 10-win season. Okay, great. Made the Pac-12 championship game. Cool. That offense was significantly worse than the one that Oregon has here, but the drop-off there is not as severe as the growth from the Ohio State defense. So I hope that answers your question, because I think it's a really good one. And I'm excited for that game. I mean, I don't care for the Pac-12 imploding and Oregon having to go to the Big Ten, but that game is going to be freaking awesome, and I really hope it's game day. There are some competitors for College game day that week. I think that's Georgia-Florida week, and Tennessee's got a big game, maybe against Alabama or somebody. There are some big games that week, but game day should be in Eugene. And Oregon is making sure, as always, that you're paying attention to what they're doing with uniforms. Surprise, surprise. I'll talk about that next. And does it actually help? I think it does.